Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video we'll be looking at which teams' fixtures rotate well and as a result, who are the optimal player rotations that we can include in our game week 1 team. The reason you might want to do this is potentially you want one cheap player on the bench and one cheap player in your starting 11 and you can rotate them every week. That allows you to always have an 11th cheaper player in your team. It can be very, very useful. So in today's video we're going to look at who are the optimal players to pick for that reason. If you are enjoying the content here on this channel, please do remember to like, comment and subscribe. But without further ado, let's jump into today's video. So guys, I want to caveat at the start that today's list of rotations is not exhaustive. I've put a lot of work into working out the best rotations here today, but there are always going to be further rotations. So feel free to let me know down below if you found an even better rotation than I mentioned today. Always happy to have your input. If you don't want to use any of the rotations I've gone through today, which is absolutely fine, you want to find your own, essentially what I would do is pick a cheap player that you really want in your team. For example, the cheap player that I want is Ricardo Pereira from Leicester. I think he's going to do really well this season. Look at the weeks where you don't want to play a Leicester player, you don't want to play Pereira in your team, and then look at other teams that in those weeks have really good fixtures and then find a cheap player from that team. And if you can do that, what you'll essentially do is find two players that complement each other really well. Some weeks you'll play Pereira, some weeks you'll play the other player that rotates in for him. And as a result, you can always have a really strong player in your team and you don't necessarily have to play that cheap player every single week. This also works for rotating keepers as well. So if any of these fixtures look good and you're someone that wants to rotate keepers, you can also do so with a very, very similar premise. So the first rotation that I've got here is actually Wolves and Arsenal. As well as the fixtures being incredibly good for rotating across the first 10, the other reason I like them is because they've both got really good options at cheap prices. And I'm specifically thinking here about Johnny and Tomiyasu for 4.5 million each for 9 million in total. If you were to go with two 4.5 million pound defenders, you could get a really nice rotation out of them. And even if you want to go slightly more expensive, you could rotate, for example, Martinelli and Neto. Maybe a little bit too much money to rotate and have one of those on your bench. You'll have to let me know down below in the comments, but I do really like that as a rotation anyway, but I'm specifically thinking about those defenders. Now, if you were to rotate those two teams, Wolves and Arsenal, here are the fixtures you get, and they're very, very nice. So for the opening two, I'd probably recommend playing your Wolves player. You get Leeds, Fulham, Bournemouth, Fulham. So in the first, and then Bournemouth. So in the first 5 weeks, you get Bournemouth twice and Fulham twice, which is absolutely excellent, and the other fixtures Leeds. So in those first 5 weeks, the rotation is perfect pretty much. You then get Southampton, Everton, Brentford. And then in 9 and 10, the fixtures aren't perfect. West Ham away and Tottenham at home. But in those first 8, this is probably the best rotation. And like I said, the other reason, just because the players that you can select are absolutely fantastic. Because, for example, Bournemouth rotate really well with some teams, but you might not necessarily want to pick a Bournemouth player anyway. Whereas I think Johnny and Tomiyasu are two very popular players regardless, and they rotate really nicely. And then you might have wildcarded by game week 9 anyway, or maybe you can either make a transfer or you can just potentially just play them. I don't think West Ham and Tottenham are the worst fixtures to play your defence in. So I really do like this, specifically from a defensive perspective, but also if you do want to rotate, maybe even if it's like Martinelli and Johnny, you don't always have to rotate like 2 defenders and 2 midfielders. You can rotate a defender and a midfielder. One will be your first sub, and the other one will be in your starting 11. So I like Wolves and Arsenal. Let me know down below what you think of this. At the moment, if I were to rotate 2 4.5s, I think Johnny and Tomiyasu might be the ones. With rotation 2, we're actually getting 2 completely new teams here, Brentford and Brighton. And you will notice as we get forward to the further rotations, some of the teams pop up more than once. And that's just because they have good fixtures and they've also got good cheap options too. But Brentford and Brighton are another team specifically in defence and also with the goalkeepers that have really good £4.5 million options. So at the moment, if someone were to ask me which rotating keepers would you select, it would probably be Raya and Sanchez because they have really nice opening fixtures for both. They rotate well and they're only 4.5 million. But the same goes for Duncan, Lamptey and Henry and Janssen. Really nice options. And the same also goes for their attackers. Undav and Burmo. There are some really nice options at that sort of £5.56 million price tag as well in the attack that you can also rotate in a similar fashion. So the fixtures that you get aren't quite as good as the Wolves-Arsenal rotation, but it does continue all the way to game week 10. You get Leicester, Newcastle, Fulham, Leeds, Fulham again, Leeds again. So Leeds and Fulham, you basically get them twice in 4 weeks, both of them. Bournemouth, Palace, Bournemouth, Newcastle. So lots of newly promoted teams, lots of other teams that are probably you would say either mid-table or lower mid-table. And I just think that's a really nice set of fixtures there. Probably the first 2 weeks would be the most tricky because both Brentford and Brighton don't have the best opening set of 2, but from game week 3 onwards, that's a seriously nice run. And I just think due to the options that they have, Brentford and Brighton, they could be another brilliant team to rotate. Let me know down below. Very good question for you. Do you like rotating keepers? Is that something that you think you would personally want to do? For me, I'm not so sure. The reason isn't necessarily that I don't think if you correctly rotate keepers, it's better than not. In my opinion, if you can correctly rotate keepers, it's 100% worth doing. The issue is I'm emphasizing correctly there because it's very tricky to try and predict when a keeper's going to get a massive haul. For example, when a keeper makes lots and lots of saves, that's when they tend to get save points, bonus points. And if they keep a clean sheet, that's when they get those 12 pointers. So the sort of fixture where you could imagine Brentford would get, Raya, would get a 12 pointer is against Manchester United at home, or even against Arsenal at home in game week 8. So often it's difficult to try and predict where those hauls are going to come. And it just sucks when you play the wrong keeper and the keeper on your bench gets 12 points and the keeper in your starting 11 gets 1 point. It's almost one extra headache each week that's pretty tricky to try and predict. But do let me know down below if you like rotating keepers. Regardless, Brentford and Brighton are a really nice rotation. So we're sticking with Brighton here, but we're actually adding in Aston Villa as opposed to Brentford. Very similar sort of set of fixtures you get, but you play them in different weeks. So this is more blocky, I would say. You get these sort of rotating over the first 3, Bournemouth, Newcastle, Palace. You then got 4 fixtures from Brighton, and then you'd probably play 3 fixtures from Villa. So it's less sort of rotating every other week. You play your Brighton players for a chunk of fixtures, then you play your Villa players for a chunk of fixtures in there as well. And to be honest, I've put Brighton there as you probably play them in game week 2, but arguably you could even play Aston Villa players in game week 2. So it could almost be opening 3, you play Villa, next 4 you play Brighton, and then the next 3 you play Villa again. So like I said, a little bit more blocky than it is alternating. But the other reason again is that Aston Villa have some pretty decent cheaper options. They maybe don't have the options at that 4.5 that you'd necessarily want as much. You'd probably want to go for a Matty Cash or a Luca Dean, and then Ramsey at 5.5 is probably the best option as sort of a mid-priced sort of budget option in the midfield too. So there are some good options to rotate with Villa and Brighton. It's probably going to be slightly more expensive than it is for Brentford and Brighton, but maybe you would argue that you expect Villa to do slightly better, and maybe they have a slightly better rotation here. Let me know down below if you are considering any Villa players, because with their opening fixtures and with their fixtures from game week 8 onwards, I think maybe they're going slightly under the radar. That being said, that run from game week 4 to game week 7 isn't the easiest set in the world, so I do sort of understand it. So we're back with Wolves here, but potentially maybe you're not convinced by Arsenal. You like the look of Wolves, you like the look of Johnny, but you don't necessarily think Tomiyasu, Ben White, etc. are great value, or potentially you're not looking at any other Arsenal attackers to rotate in. West Ham are a team that are getting absolutely no attention, and I do understand it. They've got City in the opening game, and they've also got Tottenham and Chelsea in 5 and 6. So if you take their opening 6 fixtures, they're really not fantastic at all. But again, the point of this video is you don't need to play these players every week if you've got 2 cheap players that you can rotate. So what I quite like is the Wolves and West Ham rotation. You can get away with not having to play your West Ham playing game week 1. You could play them in game week 2 if you want, but obviously Wolves also have Fulham at home. Then you can play your West Ham players for Brighton and Villa, sub them out again for Bournemouth and Southampton, and then bring them back in for a really nice run of 4 fixtures. When Wolves' fixtures start to deteriorate, you get Newcastle, Everton, Wolves, and Fulham for West Ham. And West Ham do have some really nice options in there. They've got the likes of Sofao at 4.5. Cresswell at 5 is definitely a player that's probably gone under the radar. I haven't even considered him enough, really. But at 5 million, he loves an assist. He's absolutely excellent from set pieces. West Ham's defence were pretty good last season. So I do think that West Ham is a team which maybe start to consider, especially when you think that you could rotate them with a team such as Wolves. They do rotate with a couple of other teams it's worth checking out as well. But I don't mind them. If Sofao can lock down the right back / right wing back role for West Ham, we've seen in the past he can have pretty good high expected assist and be pretty good value. So I don't mind West Ham. Maybe it's a wait and see. But if you are going with a Wolves defender or a cheap Wolves player such as Neto and you want to rotate them, which I think is probably going to be quite popular, West Ham aren't a bad option as well as Arsenal. So back with the buzzing bees, Brentford, but this time mixing in a team which is getting a lot of attention, and that is Newcastle. Now, Newcastle, similarly to Brentford and Brighton, have some really nice options at 4.5. I'm specifically looking at Sven Botman, but also Dan Burn in there as well, could be decent value. And if Cher does start ahead of Burn, maybe he's the one to go for. I really like Botman, though. Really good attacking numbers from the previous leagues he's played in. Could be a really nice option, and we're expecting him to be fairly nailed on. And Newcastle's fixtures, really it's those opening 2 which look great. But then also you've got game week 8, 9 and 10, their fixtures are quite nice. This is a bit of a weird rotation in that you're not playing the Newcastle player, in my opinion anyway, if you were to rotate with Brentford, potentially between game week 3 and 7, because the fixtures are pretty tricky for Newcastle then. But you could potentially play them in 8, 9 and 10. So again, it's a little bit more blocky. I'd play probably the Newcastle defence in the opening two against Forest and Brighton. You'd then probably play the Brentford player for Fulham, Everton, Palace, Leeds and Southampton. And then feel free to switch back to Newcastle. Newcastle are probably a slightly better defence. We're going to have to wait and see for the upcoming season. But I wouldn't mind that either. And I think Sven Botman at 4.5, or as you can see on your screen, even Trippier at 5 million could be worth rotating in with the likes of a Rico Henry, a Brian Mbeumo, whoever it may be, maybe a Johan Visser. So I really like this as a rotation, specifically because it gives you the opportunity to get a Newcastle player in. And I really do like the look of Newcastle for the upcoming season. So this is two teams which have already been discussed in the video, but in different combinations. And this is Arsenal and Newcastle. Arguably maybe my second favourite rotation here, because you can get Tomiyasu and you can get Trippier or Botman. And I think that's a really, really nice combination here. You can see or Dan Burn or Ben White, really those £4.5 million defenders. But again, I know a lot of people are going for more of a premium defence. So what you could do here is rotate some of the attackers, rotate some of the midfielders, maybe something like a Tomiyasu and a St. Maximan in midfield. That's also an option. Or a Bruno G and Tomiyasu, or a Bruno G and Ben White. Again, it doesn't have to necessarily be £4.5 million defenders, two of them. It could just be one cheaper defender and a cheaper midfielder. And the teams rotate really nicely there. You've got a similar setup here where you're playing the Newcastle players for game week 1 and 2, and also from game week 8 onwards. But in this specific combination, just because Arsenal have a slightly trickier fixture, you would say in game week 6, you can also play the Newcastle player there against Crystal Palace. So this is probably a slightly more balanced rotation than rotation 5. And also it does give you the opportunity to get into that Arsenal defence, which once again, along with Wolves, I think Arsenal defence has probably been the most popular sort of cheaper defence in there. So I do like Arsenal and Newcastle. I think you're targeting two teams who are likely to finish, almost definitely going to finish in the top half of the table. And like I said, Sven Botman and Tomiyasu for 9 million definitely rivals Johnny and Tomiyasu for 9 million as well. So guys, the final rotation today, before we move on to discussing specific players that I would like to rotate, or I would suggest rotating for your Game Week 1 teams, is Leicester and Brighton. Now, the reason for this is Leicester players are actually getting a little bit of attention in the FPL community, and I don't really blame managers for looking at them. 4.5 million for the likes of Ricardo Pereira, James Justin, and Castagna look like excellent options. And I guess it just comes down to, can we predict which of those players are going to start at fullback / wingback for Leicester? Because they obviously have Luke Thomas in there as well. And we think there might be a little bit of rotation. But assuming we can nail down which of them are going to start, they could offer really good value at 4.5. Leicester rotate decently with a couple of teams, but the team that I think they rotate best with is Brighton, who are popping up regularly. The reason for some of these teams, such as Brighton, Brentford, Arsenal, and Wolves popping up over and over again, is pretty much all 10 of their opening fixtures are really good, which means they're easy to rotate with some other players there. So Brighton and Leicester rotate in a way that you get Brentford, Newcastle, Southampton. You then get Leicester and Fulham. They then play each other, so feel free to choose whoever you want at that stage. Then Bournemouth, Palace, Nottingham Forest, and Bournemouth. So you get a lot of newly promoted teams in there. No particularly tricky fixtures. Maybe Newcastle and Arsenal on game week 2 is the only fixture where you might not want to play either of them particularly. But I really don't mind that. And again, if in pre-season we get a bit of an inclination that Pereira or Castagna, probably my favourite two there, are likely to start a lot of the games, maybe we take a punt on them. And I do really think they could be fantastic options. And then again, you can either rotate them with Undav, you could rotate them with one of the cheap midfielders from Brighton, or potentially Dunk or Lamptey as well. So as a final rotation, I really don't mind that. And I think Leicester in particular, because their fullbacks / wingbacks can be so attacking, it might be a rotation that offers a little bit more upside in comparison to some of the previous ones we've talked about. So we've spoken about rotating pairs throughout the video today, so I don't want to repeat myself too much here, but these are just some examples of what I mean by the sort of rotating pairs you could get. And you can see I've put the possibilities at endless. Of course, they're not actually endless, but there are, just from the teams I've spoken about today, maybe 15, 20, even 30 rotating pairs that you could get. Then if you look at some other teams, which I haven't even discussed, the likes of Nottingham Forest, potentially if they get Neco Williams, that could be a great rotation there. You could look at teams that rotate well with Forest, Bournemouth, Fulham. There are other teams which could also rotate well, but they've just got so many tricky fixtures that I think the teams that I focused on today might be the best for the opening 10. And then after, when you do your first wildcard, maybe for the second half of the season, you can look at other rotating pairs there. So here are just some of the ones. We've mentioned some of them already. The likes of Botman and Tomiyasu, or Johnny and Tomiyasu, could be a really nice one. Again, if you're not interested by Tomiyasu, it could be Ben White, it could be Martinelli, it could be Erdegaard. It doesn't really matter who it is, but I think these teams rotate quite well. I've got Cash and Dunk as a slightly more expensive one there, but you do get Matty Cash in there, and Dunk has really good attacking value. So for only 0.5 more, that could be a really nice pair. I've put Raya and Sanchez just as an example. Again, if you do want to rotate keepers, I think they're probably the best two to rotate there at a very cheap price of 9 million. And then you've got Visser and Undav as well at 5.5 and 5.5. If you do want to rotate to attackers instead, I don't mind that actually, right? For 11 million, you could probably do a lot worse than that. And then Pereira and Dunk just to finish off, just to again show you that if you do want a Leicester mid defender, I don't mind that. And that is just as cheap as the likes of Botman and Tomiyasu too. So hopefully this video has given you something a little bit different to think about with respect to maybe rotating that final spot. And if you are looking to get a third premium into your team, or you're looking to go like super big at the back with like 4 of your defenders, rotating an 11th spot in your team can be quite a nice way to do it. And what that does mean is that you've always got a strong first sub as well. So for if some reason you're not rotating them, but your first sub needs to come on, you've still got a decent option there. So if you're rotating Pereira and Dunk, yes, the player of first sub might not have the best fixture, but at least you've got a decent playing sub on there. So that's the other reason that I like rotating pairs. I will probably, in some format, have a rotating pair. So at the moment, I've got Neto in my starting 11, and I've got Tomiyasu first sub. I'm not necessarily planning to rotate them, but in some weeks, I might say, I want to play Tomiyasu ahead of Neto, and then that's absolutely fine to do. So let me know down below, like I said, what any of your rotating pairs are, but hopefully this video has been useful to at least make you start to think about rotating an 11th spot in your team. So guys, there you have it. That is my rotating fixtures / player rotations video done and dusted. I do hope this was a slightly different but also helpful video for you, and something that's definitely worth thinking about going into the new season. Doesn't always have to be from game week 1, but it's always good to bear in the back of your mind that you don't have to play players in every week if you can build some really, really good rotations to rotate these players in and out. If you're enjoying the content here on this channel, I would really appreciate you subscribing. As I've said in the past few videos, we are aiming for 20,000 subscribers by the start of the season, which would be absolutely amazing to hit. So if you are new to the channel and you've not yet subscribed, please do consider doing so. But until next time, thanks for watching. Cheers. Bye-bye.